So if this is where we are today, where would we be if the pension is shifted and if we don't keep up maintenance of effort? We are already suffering.
I'm sorry, I can't stop. That's a really important question. I'd like to actually start to John Andes first with this. Because when you said earlier, tying into what was just said, that if I heard you right, that when maintenance of effort doesn't take into account inflation, and you're the superintendent we have on the panel at the moment, so what happens to your school? What goes missing? And I would imagine that what's happening in your
personnel
is no different than what's happening in your Worcester County schools.
Well, Mark, to respond to your question, what we've done in Worcester County Public Schools, because we've received only maintenance of effort from our county government over the last 3 years, is we've had to take everything and cut everything we could possibly cut but people. So as a result, we've taken all of our textbooks, supplies, materials expenditures back to 2006 levels. That's where we are in Worcester County Public Schools. At the same time, we've not given any pay raises to anyone over the last 3 years. And in fact, we did cut 34 positions from our school.
Teaching positions.
Teaching positions from our school. So as a result of a maintenance of effort budget, we're still faced with those challenges that we talked before with increasing costs and try to address those costs. I thank you for being a teacher. I thank you for doing the tremendous job that you do. I thank you for loving our kids.
Amen to that.
And if I could I also add one more point that I know is on the minds of many others here? Would that be okay? Thank you.
And if I said no?
I'm a teacher. I follow the rules. I do believe that we are at a very critical point in this state in terms of how we want to look at children. And there are two things that are occurring. One is the fiscal piece that we're discussing right now, but the other is the linkage of teacher evaluation. Yeah. And as I said, I'm not the only one. And I want everybody to pause for a moment, because even though children with significant needs may be the minority, it is a very significant number of teachers and therapists who are working with those students. And I believe that if we are not careful, we're going to impact inclusion of students with disabilities in significant ways. Because if a principal, if a general education teacher sees a student who, by the nature of their disability, of their disease, cancer, of their syndrome, many syndromes, is either going to develop at a greatly reduced rate, because that is how their brain is developing, or may actually deteriorate over time. I don't want any child to be greeted with anything other than open arms. And I do think that we run a risk if we allow this to play out over the years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Christian Rhodes, I mean, we talk about layoffs in Worcester. You laid off over 900 people in your county, right?
Well, I mean,
in the schools.
So I didn't
not laid off, the wrong word.
I didn't lay off. I didn't lay off anyone. Just for the record.
Not you, Bernie. You didn't sign leave.
No, speaking for the county, the school system was faced with a $155 million deficit last year, and through that $155 million deficit, yes, really over 1,000 positions were eliminated out of the budget. But that just wasn't for last year. These positions have been eliminated over the last several years in Prince George's County. About 250 teachers were laid off due to budget cuts. 250. But this is actually the kicker. We also, unfortunately, because of the budget, really offered veteran teachers a retirement incentive. And what I believe that actually occurred for us is that we lost a large number of our most educated, our most dedicated, our most experienced teachers. So now we're faced with a prospect this year where we're going to really have to buckle down, provide additional professional development with no money for those teachers who do not have that experience. Those mentor teachers, those reading coaches, those math coaches that we had in our system, when faced with the prospect of a pension change last year, and faced with the prospect of having to take more kids on, they decided to retire. And I don't begrudge them that by any stretch of the imagination. That's a brain drain on our employment workforce, and that's something that we have to deal with. And just a real quick point to the teacher that just spoke. what I like about Prince George's County is the ability of labor and the school system to come together to work to figure out these tough issues around teacher evaluations. The association and the school system came together to work on the best evaluation model for Prince George's County. What I like about Prince George's County also is their ability to take on some really tough, controversial issues and find ways to best fit Prince George's County, but without additional resources, it makes it nearly impossible. I mean, we can talk about everything we want to talk about, but there's no money behind it. It's nearly impossible to implement it.
So before I turn back to our elected officials, I have a direct question out of all this for you all before we go back to our audience. I mean, I'm curious if you want to add on, Ray Leone, from the president PTA in Anne Arundel County, how that's affected Anne Arundel County schools, what you've heard from Worcester and what you've heard from...
Well, they've had that hiring freeze in place at the administration level for 4 years. And there are a lot of folks on both sides of that, you know, maybe we were top heavy, maybe we weren't. But they haven't hired any real new teachers in a while. Well, no, I take that back. They've hired a lot of new teachers to replace folks that are moving on to greener pastures in other counties because we've been frozen in time for 4 years. So we see that in the level of expertise that's actually engaging our children. And we're getting a lot of new teachers and great ideas and no fault to a new teacher over a seasoned teacher at all. But as a parent, you want that best teacher in front of your child. And that means good pay, good resources for them to work with, quality constructed schools that aren't hundreds of years old in some cases. And that all has to be there.
So going back to our elected representatives, what happens now? I mean, from your perspective, there's not anybody in this panel of elected officials who says you want to send part of the responsibility for teachers' pensions back to local jurisdictions. Am I right about that?
Right, but we have to find the money somewhere, right?
But you got, right.
There are all kinds of revenue options that could be on the table that aren't even being discussed. Revenue options that don't hurt the middle class and that aren't regressive. We're hearing no one talk about putting the surcharge on millionaires back on the table. We hear no one talking about closing loopholes for combined reporting so that corporations don't continue to skate off without paying their corporate taxes here in Maryland because they happen to be set up in Delaware as a corporate headquarters. There's no discussion about luxury taxes on the sales of things like boats and other items that you might make money hand over fist on. There's no discussion of why we're spending so much on building new juvenile justice detention centers in cities where if we were investing that same amount of money into improving our schools, we wouldn't need those facilities.
Senator Benson?
Yes, I wanted to say also that in Prince George's County, the budget for the Prince George's County Public Schools has had a devastating impact on teachers. In Prince George's County, the teachers have not received a pay raise in 4 years. And they continue to do the best that they could for children. And Christian is absolutely correct. Teachers don't walk away. We have it in our heart to want to teach every child. But the fact of the matter is that people do not, see, once again, I want to get back to the education piece. We've got to talk to the public about the importance of funding education. And you asked the question about where we can get the money. I do think that if we do a good job of informing the public, we can come up with a funding source in our county to ensure that we get the money that's necessary to educate our children. We have not talked about professional development, professional staff development for teachers who need the help. We put the new teachers in the classroom and we leave them. And we don't give them the kind of tools and the kind of support that they need to do the job that needs to be done. And so when you talk about the transfer of pensions to the county, it will definitely have an impact on our school system. We're going to have more furloughs. We're going to have increase in class sizes. No one is talking about the health benefits that are going to put, some of the things that we worked so hard for can be so easily eliminated if we put pensions on the backs of our counties.
Senator Gargiulo.
Yeah, three points, I guess. One, over the last 10 years, we've almost doubled our K-12 education fund. And I think that does speak volumes about what the state's commitment has been. Senator Benson mentioned the Bridge to Excellence. I mean, this is a direct result of it. So the state has put the resources in. The state has put the resources in for education. We put our money where our mouth is. It's pretty incredible. Nearly double. It was a little more than $3 billion we were spending in 2002. We've added over $2.6 billion in spending. I think it was $3.1 billion we were spending in 2000. We've added over $2.6 billion in spending for K-12 education. So I think that's something to be very proud of as a state, that the state recognizes, since I've been here essentially, since I got elected in 2002. We've made a commitment to education. That's one of the reasons why I came here. Number two, we need to make sure that if the state is making the investment in education, that our local governments are making the investment in education. As the superintendent said, it's not the maintenance of effort does not have an inflationary impact. It's basically saying you got to spend per pupil what you spent the year before. So really, if you just do that, you're falling a little bit backward, quite honestly, as a local government. But to me, that should be the very minimum. We need to fix that. Number three, and Delegate Meserve raised this, the pension shift debate is not about this year's budget, because there are additional funding sweeteners, so to speak, that are in this year's budget that roughly is almost equivalent. So in other words, there is additional revenues that would go to the county governments that is roughly equal to what the pension shift would be for this upcoming fiscal year. So if you took away the pension shift for this year and you took away the add-on of dollars to the county for this year, you would still be at the same place that you are today. What the pension shift is about future years, because those dollars to the local governments aren't there in years 2, 3, and 4. So for purposes of balancing this year's budget, what we need to do is, if you don't shift the pension and you don't provide those extra revenues to the county, you're at the same place that you would be if you provided the extra revenues to the county and you shifted the pension for purposes of balancing the budget this fiscal year, which is really what our obligation is. It's the following year that you have to worry about, because the shift, you're still dealing with the shift. The local governments are still dealing with the shift in years 2 and 3, but those additional revenues from the state going to the local governments aren't there. So for purposes of this year, it's really far simpler than is being laid out.
Cheryl Boast, a teacher in Baltimore County, and a couple comments. Senator Benson has given us some of the history and where we've gotten to today. But an important piece that I think the public, as you talk about educating the public, needs to know is last year, all members of the pension system took a huge hit in their own pocket because the benefits were decreased. And it was said last year that this decrease and change in benefits would solve the pension problem. And we all pay 2% more into the pension. We get less. Our newer teachers, they're coming into the worst pension probably in the United States. But yet we're here again. And it's still a problem, but yet more of our money is going into it. And the problem is thousands of us came down last year and we rallied, and it still went through in the budget, because if you wanted to vote against it, you had to vote against the budget. And we knew that that would be detrimental to the state. And the reason why maintenance of effort has to be discussed at the same time as this pension is because if this pension shift gets put through the budget, we are going to be stuck with it all being counted as maintenance of effort, and even more cuts are going to be made to our schools. So you have to fix maintenance of effort. And one of the things that you have to fix is to make sure the pension and debt services and all those things, the funny supplanting, doesn't get counted as maintenance of effort. It has to stay out. It can only be education costs, because I can say in our county, we used to get 52% of the budget. Now it looks like we still get 52% of the budget, but all this other stuff is moved into that percentage. We're not getting that. And as the state superintendent talked about, in Baltimore County, we lost 200 teachers last year through attrition. Our high school class sizes have greatly increased. 5% of school budgets were cut. And we have to remember, we have to meet federal regulations for testing, for everything else. So a lot of that money we don't see in the classroom. It has to go for computers. It has to go for testing. It has to go for everything else. So you have to put all these years together and let nobody have amnesia that it keeps falling on the backs of educators.